couple of times, and today we're on YouTube, and I think we're on Riverside as well, which I didn't even know you could go live on Riverside, but apparently you can, so I just turned it on. So if anybody drops in later or has come in from Riverside, welcome. Today, I've got Dan Clarke with me, who is a longtime friend of the show. Dan and I have had chats since, I guess, 2023, probably about AI. And I think it's been, we were just saying it's 18 months, maybe 2 years even since you've really been on and we've had a chat about, where we are and what we think about AI. So I think this could be an interesting conversation. So welcome back.
Thanks, David. Hopefully, it'll be an interesting conversation. I'm sure it will.
It's always interesting
Yeah.
to us. So just give everybody like a 30 second, because some people may not know who you are. You don't have to go into great detail, but if you give sort of a little bit of a 30 second just about your background and where you are and what you do, just to have a little bit of context to the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So, I work for a collection of councils in the Cambridge area. I'm the head of innovation and technology, and I'm looking at how emerging technology and data can support some of the projects that we're delivering in Cambridge, primarily around kind of transport. So, been in this role for some time now, and there are two areas that we're kind of primarily working in at the moment. The first is how we can build a data infrastructure and then use that data infrastructure to support the transport system, making sure that that is AI ready, and obviously starting to explore how AI is impacting the transport system. And then on the other side, we've been doing work for about 10 years now looking at automated vehicles. It actually came out of the University of Cambridge. We did some work with a professor there very early doors. And we are now running a project called Connector. So we've got three full-size automated buses running around Cambridge. So really interested in how autonomy can support the public transport system. My kind of background, I stumbled into the use of technology in transport. Before this role, I worked on a number of kind of transport projects, and before that, worked in kind of new developments around Cambridge, and in a previous life in the civil service, working in kind of housing and all sorts of things. So I am not a technologist. I always say that my job really is to take emerging technology and then translate it into the real world and look at how we can apply it.
Amazing. That's a great summary. And it's interesting you've already hit on something that's really interesting that not a lot of people talk about, around AI, particularly maybe more in a corporate sense, but I don't think a lot of people talk about it. But it's the readiness of the data to be able to be used by AI. And you and I have worked together. I mean, we worked together years ago for quite a few years on looking at data platforms and stuff like that. Has what I guess my question is has that moved on in the last couple of years, and the way, what's your thinking now about how you implement AI and how you get the data ready to be used by AI? Because if it's not structured and it's not sort of presented in the right way, then I guess AI can't even really use it to any good effect. So is that the biggest challenge that you have at the minute?
So that's been a huge challenge over a number of years, and as you know, we've tried to crack this before to develop a kind of a data platform that allowed us to aggregate all our transport data onto. We do now have a platform. We've got significant amounts of data on there, and actually that was driven by need. So we built a big sensor network across Cambridge, collecting huge amounts of data, and it inundated our business intelligence team. There was just too much data for them to do anything with. So we now have a data platform that actually uses AI to support the kind of cleaning and structuring of that data that's then stored on that platform. We've begun to aggregate other types of data, so parking data and real-time bus data and incidents on the network, roadworks, kind of all that data. And that now is really well structured, it's cleaned, and we've really thought about how we use it. So there are a number of connectors that go into things like Power BI. Power BI is used across the authority, you
Yeah.
know, and so we've been able to build dashboards which allow people who aren't data experts to really begin to use that data. And more importantly, that data is now kind of AI ready. So we've had a number of people approach us about projects, funded projects that utilize AI, and we've been able to quite quickly say yes, join the project, and it's been very easy for them to use our data. Up until this point, though, there was data across the whole authority. It was stored in closed systems, impossible to use. It's messy. Even some of the data where we were using the latest kind of sensing technology, so we were using vision-based sensors, machine learning, collecting huge amounts of data. Even that was very messy because things happen. When you deploy hardware in the real world, you get trees growing over it, which means that you get dropouts
Mhm.
in data or it erodes data quality. Someone will chop through a power cable. A bus will park in front of the kind of screen line that you're using to count. And and what we found was that things like that, events like that, won't be marked in the metadata. But we're working really hard to kind of address that, clean it up, to make data as usable as possible, but also as accurate as possible. And that's really improved, I think, the way that we use data as an organisation. We found, we had some initial use cases where we'd be using it to monitor new infrastructure, the impact that that has. But actually, once you've got the data, once it's easy to build tools, then you find more and more people want to use it. And so it really has kind of, I think, changed the organization to a kind of a data led organization that's really embedding it kind of within its work. And then the next really exciting step is that you can start to build AI tools on top of it, which allow you to interrogate data in a natural language way. So instead of having to, build BI dashboards or having to be able to do kind of some sort of data analysis, I, as a, you know, non-data expert, can
Yeah.
just go in and type how many cars went down Mill Road from 12 o'clock till 3 o'clock on Wednesday the 5th, and it will tell us, it will draw a graph, and then you might be able to say what was the weather like, and it will say, well, it was raining, and that will give you a bit of contextual information. And I think that's really exciting because that unlocks data for people who are non-data experts.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what's also interesting about that is using AI to help clean the data, because we've known, and I've done data analytics for years, and part of it is that you get incomplete data sets, but all of the entire world runs off statistical analysis, right? So you don't actually need every single line to be 100% accurate. So cleaning that data and just getting rid of the stuff that's trash and keeping the rest of it, once you have a certain amount of that, it's still going to be accurate even if you lose all that stuff. And again, people don't talk about this, but using AI tools that are slightly different than a machine learning tool in that you can, I think the AI bit is the interactivity bit. So you can use that natural language to say, look at this data, here's what it should include. Anything that it, is missing or anything that looks like it's bad data, just remove it. And then you end up with a clean data set. I mean, for someone doing data analysis, that's massive to be able to do that. And it's, people focus so much on, oh, I want it to write something for me, or I want it to do that, and I want it to do this bit of research, and it comes back and it makes up stuff. But they fail to realize that you've got this other side of the tool that can do these sorts of tasks so much more efficiently and so much easier for, like you said, people in the organization who aren't like software engineers and they're not data analysts. And it just, I think that, I think that's going to really open up, particularly in public sector, if you can get other councils to start doing that as well. Then you can get to some point eventually where if every council has a clean data set, then you can start to combine them together and say, okay, we're now looking at data across multiple cities to understand, do we have the same issues in these different places and stuff? So that's going to be really cool. What do you,
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can also do is, so where you've got those gaps in data and yes, you know, you can, you know, you've then got a kind of an accurate data set, you understand why you've got those gaps and you can kind of allow for that. But also if you've got enough data, then you can use synthetic data to fill those gaps,
yeah.
so that you've then got a kind of a complete data set, which is probably more accurate than it would have been before we were using kind of AI and synthetic data.
Mm.
And that really helps as well.
Yeah, that's true. What what's your feeling on the appetite for using AI in, and again, I know you can only speak for your little area, but I little area, sorry, that sounds terrible.
That's right. Very patronising.
It's not a little area, people. But you talk to other people working in public sector. I know you work with, other councils, and you're always at events and stuff. And what do you think the attitude is towards using AI these days as opposed to a couple of years ago?
So I think there's a huge amount of interest in it, and people are just trying to get to grips with what that actually means. I mean, there's a lot of, as you know, kind of smoke and mirrors in AI, and so actually trying to get to the heart of, um, you know, what is AI? How can I use it, and how can it kind of transform the way that we do business? I think is difficult. I think that the natural default is just to put Copilot on, allow Copilot use.
Yeah.
But actually, it can be really transformative, and I've heard some really good examples of people who are using it in a way that is saving significant amount of time and effort. Now, this isn't about kind of getting rid of people's jobs. So an example is, social workers who are going out, meeting clients, really difficult situations, really kind of an emotional, difficult conversations. And previously, they would have to talk to them and take notes. And, now they can take a device with them. They can
Yep.
record the conversation. They can, get those kind of notes into some understandable kind of order. They can share the notes with the client. Agree that the content is what they were expecting, and that saves a huge amount of effort.
Yeah.
Post that appointment. Um, and it means that people can concentrate on doing the stuff that they should be doing, which is caring for people and that kind of social care work, and not be doing all the kind of admin work that comes with that. And I think that's, that may not sound very exciting, but actually that has the I think there's a real opportunity to reduce the amount of just bureaucracy that we have to kind of wade through every day, and actually concentrate on our jobs and deliver stuff that people want.
Yeah, and you and I've talked about this, and I've talked about this since the very beginning, and I've always said that, the thing that I really want is like a Jarvis or some sort of a personal assistant, right? And I can just tell it to do stuff and it just does stuff. And I think the first step that we've all seen towards that are the note takers. Now, I've been in Zoom calls where there were more AIs than there were actually people on the call.
I've arrived on calls where I've been expecting people, three note takers have arrived, and I'm
Yeah.
just sat there with them,
Yeah,
wondering
exactly.
whether I ought to chat to them or not.
Yeah, I always have to, sometimes I can't even control myself, but I usually try and resist the urge to just say really random stuff at the beginning just to throw the notes off. But but oddly though, that has turned out to be enormously helpful. And I mean, we're not doing it today, but when I signed in, my Notion, shout out, there are other, platforms, but my Notion basically said, "Oh, do you want me to transcribe this conversation?" It just comes up automatically. So anytime you get on a voice call, it's like, "Do you want me to do this?" I know Google does it. I know everybody does it now. But that one thing has made everybody's life actually a bit easier, because
Yeah.
it does transcribe everything. It means you don't, because I remember before AI, and you'll remember this, is you'd be on a call or you'd be in a meeting and you're trying to take notes and you're trying to listen at the same time, and somebody's saying something important and you're over here, and you're furiously trying to write these notes, but you're also trying to listen to what's next, and it's like you can't keep up with everything, and it was really difficult. Now you don't
Uh,
have to do the whole note taking thing. You can just literally sit, focus on the conversation, let the notes come, and then you get a transcript, so you actually get everything that was said by everyone, and then you get the summary and the actions and all the other stuff out of it. And it's a massive time saver, and I can see how, particularly with in those sorts of roles like you were saying, where you've got home visits, you've got people with sensitive conversations, and there's also, I would imagine that there's a lot of he said, she said, I didn't say that. That's not what I said, back and forth. And, oh, you didn't tell me that, and all the other stuff. And if you're in a situation where you have a transcript, that can also make it easier. It makes it easier for both sides. Um,
yeah, I mean, I have terrible handwriting, and in the past, you're frantically scribbling in books, and you've got all these kind of books of notes you've taken, and constantly looking back and thinking, what have I written there? I don't,
yeah.
I don't really understand that. So,
Yeah.
so I think that has made things, a lot easier. But also things like we do a lot of funding grants, and funding grants ask you to answer 5 questions in 300 words, and you could write
That's the
four
most
pages
annoying
on
thing in the
it.
world.
It is the most
It's
annoying thing
so
in the world.
difficult.
But now I can write 1,000 words, and then I can
Yeah.
put it into Copilot and say, turn this into 300 words. Don't lose the what it is that I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. And quite quickly you can get to that 300 word limit, and it maintains the actually what it is that you're trying to say, and that has saved a huge amount of time recently.
Yeah. I my usage of I think in the beginning, like everybody else, it was fun to sort of play around with and get it to like write stuff for you and do all sorts of things. But where I'm with it today is that I tend to write my own stuff and then put it in and get it edited. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I've written this email now. Here's what I'm trying to do, or can you shorten it, or am I missing? So have I forgot something? Particularly if I'm talking about a project, and a lot of times it will come back and it will go, what about this? And I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a really good point, I should have mentioned that. And then, do you know what I mean? It's more like an editor, and a
Yes.
and a and a yeah, like an editor, really. And I end up doing all my own stuff, and I don't ever take anything, I think, from it exactly as it's written anyway. I always want to tweak it a little bit because it's never just right, but
I think that's the mistake that some people make. They think that
yeah.
it can generate text and you just use that, but you always need, I think at the moment, a human in the loop to go through it and make sure it actually makes sense. Because quite often there are just some nuances where it's off, or it's put something in there that it probably shouldn't. So yeah, you do have to be really careful. But also, I still think there is value in writing in your own voice, and having some kind of personality, and it does strip that away somewhat.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the same, it's the same reason that I opened a studio. Is it's kind of like I doubled down on actually real people, and what we're seeing now in society is that a lot of the platforms like YouTube and stuff are doing a lot to identify AI channels. There's tons and tons of just AI crap channels that just generate thousands of videos, and YouTube's demonetizing and canceling them all, and which is great. And so it's great for the people that are creating content, that are actually real people, and they're getting promoted more than some other channels now. So I think we haven't got past the human aspect of anything yet. I don't think. I think everybody still likes having a human in the loop, thankfully.
I think so, and I hope we never get past that. I think having a real experience with other people is just really important.
Yeah, yeah. Now I know you also have school age kids as well. So what's the my son's out of school now, so I've kind of lost touch with what the schools are thinking and stuff like that. And I know you also have a mate who runs a school. Um, what's your view on how are schools viewing AI these days?
So, so the school that my daughter's in very much see AI as a tool that helps and supports children's learning. I think it's got enormous possibility. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and they were talking about how in the future your children may be able to create, you know, agents that are um, bespoke for them for each of their subjects, that understands how they learn,
Mm-hmm.
understands where they are in the curriculum, and can act as like a private tutor and really help them in a way that is tailored to their learning style, because everyone's kind of learning style is different.
Yeah.
So that hasn't arrived yet in the school that my daughter's in, but you could see that could really be transformational for kind of children. I mean, she has ADHD, so there is a particular learning style that kind of suits her, and being able to tailor school to her, I think, would would really have changed her kind of school experience. I think at the moment, there is a bit of wariness about children using it. They are being taught about, how to use ChatGPT, that they shouldn't rely on it for their homework, but that actually it's a tool that can be used. She's just finished her art GCSE, did quite a lot of research using AI, which was really, I think really beneficial and helpful, but
Mm.
really just used it as a kind of search engine. But I know that the teachers are using it a lot in the background.
Yeah. And when I went and did the chat at the school a couple of years ago, I remember that even then the students were using it. And I know, again, I've talked about this before, but for anybody that's new, um, the students were using it to practice their answers for like their GCSEs and their A levels. So they would take the question and they would say, this is my GCSE English test, whatever, and here's a sample question, and they'd put the question in, and then they would put their answer in, and then say, grade it and tell me where I can make improvements. And they were using that as a tool. And I remember talking to the teachers, and the teachers were very wary of that in the beginning, and they said to the kids, try it, but bring in show us what it's telling you so we can make sure that it's correct. And they said they were absolutely floored by the results that they were getting, and they said it was coming up with stuff that they wouldn't even have thought of. That was a great idea. And I just thought, you know that was a private school that was kind of on the forefront of using AI to help students just do better on their exams.
Yeah,
And again, it
yeah,
was the editing function, right? So it's that's where it was coming in. So the kids, it wasn't giving them an answer. It was basically saying, here's how to make your answer better and more
yeah.
complete, which is again a fantastic use of the tool.
And I think it's really important to expose children to these tools early on and get them using them, but teaching them that that they are flawed, that you can't trust everything that you're told, that
Mm.
you have to have a critical eye, that it's important that you really kind of understand what the AI has come back with, that you go through it, because otherwise, and I'm sure pupils have been caught out where they've just cut and pasted things where the AI
Yeah.
has hallucinated and basically regurgitated stuff which isn't right. And we've seen that in professional environments where lawyers have used cases which aren't real, that
Yeah.
have been kind of created by AI.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but I think that's a really important skill for children as they kind of move through the world and become older, is actually how you interact with these models, and how you use them, and how you build those kind of critical skills that will be really important in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I know. I know loads of people that use Notebook LM now, which is the Google kind of thing where you can gather all your research together, and then it creates a podcast with two voices that goes through whatever the research is and explains everything to you. And what they're using it for is to analyze really big complicated documents. Like it could be like the UK transport policy, and they would just take that whole PDF and load it in there and just say, explain this to me. And then it's just two voices, like a man and a woman talking on a podcast, that literally will go through the whole thing and pull out all the points and everything that are the important bits that you need to know out of the whole document, and then they don't have to read it.
Wow, that is interesting. But obviously, it will never
Top tip.
replace the human podcast
No,
host.
I know, but but it's the research bit, right? It's the thing of it talking to you. So if you're driving and you know you've got to go to Manchester for the day or something, or you're on the train or whatever, and you're like, I've got to read this transport document and it's 300 pages long, you just chuck it in there and go, give me a 15-minute podcast that explains what you know what's in here and what I need to know.
And also, again, because children learn differently,
Mm,
it may be that for a child, being able to listen to a podcast is much more digestible than having to read things. So yeah,
yeah,
it's really interesting.
yeah. So what about you personally? How are your feelings on it, just in general?
So I think on a practical level, well, I'm really seeing, benefits. We just finished a piece of work actually looking at um, public consultations. So we did a really big public consultation a couple of years ago. We had, I think it was about 25,000 responses. Within
Yep, I
those
remember.
responses, yeah, there was there was 10 or 11 questions which were all free text. So with a third party company, we've taken that historic data. We built kind of a large language model, and also some kind of safety rails, safeguarding around there. We looked at buyers. We built, or the company built tools which mean that you can check that the results that you're getting are actually reflected in the data, which brings in some kind of accountability, and that helps with our kind of governance. And then we compared the results of that to the actual analysis that was done by humans. Um, Obviously, quite a significant reduction in cost, but more
Mm,
importantly, we're seeing some conclusions drawn from it which weren't in the human analysis, because the AI has drawn links across different bits of data that was missed by the coding that was done on the initial
mm,
data set. And what's really interesting is now that we've built that, we can then start to add more and more data into it. If we do future consultations, um, you can add consultation data into it. And previously, what's happened is you do a consultation and the data sits in a silo, but now you're building a kind of a knowledge base of what people think to certain schemes, what people would like to see, and then you can kind of monitor that over time. You can refer back to old previous consultations, and also because you can do analysis now so quickly, it could change the consultation process where you can do really quick
mm.
consultations, and then you can iterate and consult and really change the way that you kind of engage with people. So I think that sort of thing has made me kind of hopeful that we can deploy AI for public good. The work that we're doing around autonomous buses, we're seeing the technology improving, and again, you know, it's we're moving from a point where it's not a technology problem with a lot of this stuff. It's a human kind of cultural problem. It's like, will
Mm.
people get on a bus where there's no driver? Will they feel safe? How do we get people with wheelchairs on and off? And it's all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So, but again, I think there's some really big opportunities there. So I think, you know, generally when it comes to work, some really interesting opportunities. We're lucky that we've had academic help and support. So through the University of Cambridge, they've got a program
Yeah.
called AI at CAM. They've really been helping the public sector in looking at AI and thinking about the ethics of deployment, the opportunities. So yeah, I think that's really positive. I think on a personal kind of note, I mean, how often do I use AI in my personal life? Probably not very often at the moment. I try and avoid AI generated music and content, because I still prefer humans.
Playing it
Um,
yourself
yeah,
because you're a musician. If again, if people are new, Dan's a musician, so
yeah, yeah. So I I've had we've had conversations about AI generating music before. I think AI is a
Mm.
tool, as the synthesizer was, so it could be used in interesting ways. But I think if you're just generating slop using AI,
Yeah.
that's not what I want. I want to go and see somebody play something and the emotion of that, and so. Um, but I think where there really is the potential for things to get interesting is with AI agents. And you know
Mm.
in the future, what I'd like to be able to do is say, look, me and my family want to go to, I don't know, Italy. I mean, for 3 weeks, we want to go to these places. This is the type of accommodation we like staying in. This is what we like to do. Just go out and book it all for me.
Yeah.
And while we're there, if the train's cancelled or whatever, the AI agent can rebook that and let me know when the next train is, and kind of just take some of the grunt work out of doing those
Yeah.
those kind of things, or
Yeah.
something that you know would tell me the cheapest. There probably are tools that can do this, but you have all these kind of bills that you have to pay over the year, and running a house and all that kind of stuff. Just an
Mm.
agent that would just be changing stuff in the background to whatever's
Yeah.
cheapest, or based on the parameters. Just
Yeah.
stuff like that that takes the work, the kind of stuff that I don't enjoy out of life, so that you can spend more time doing stuff that you do enjoy, would be great.
Yeah, it would be amazing. I can't wait. I mean, it's
Yeah,
coming, right? We are getting little bits and pieces, one at a time. And I think there was a mad, like everything, there was a mad rush in the beginning, and everybody was just running headlong into, oh, let's do this, let's deploy that. And I think, you know, we, I, I think everybody realized there was going to be a sort of a shrinking of the AI market, which I think we have seen. I think a lot of the smaller AI companies have fallen by the wayside, and they either got bought up by larger companies who started integrating everything, or they just couldn't sustain the model because it eventually got too expensive for them to be able to run because they didn't have their own model. Um, and now we're getting to that point that we are getting those more considered sort of applications. So the stuff you're talking about, right? Again, this isn't like public facing stuff. It's not making hiring decisions. It's not making decisions about people's you know how their benefits are done. That might be something that's happening in another part of government, but certainly at your level, it's about making sure the data is correct. It's not doing anything with the data. It's just helping clean the data, and it's making it easy for people to understand what's there, and it's analyzing what people think and those sorts of things, which I think is those are the practical day-to-day things that are going to form the foundation of our Jarvis or whatever we decide to call it. you know, and again, do you remember in the very beginning, I was always, what would you call it?
I
Um,
do.
um, but yeah, we are getting there. We are getting there, and It's going to be pretty weird, but kind of fun. I mean, I'm still looking forward to it. I just,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I do. I think in the transport space, there's huge
yeah,
opportunities around how we manage traffic networks, or transport networks in cities, how people interact with it, how we give people information, how we better integrate systems. There's huge opportunities, just working out what's the pathway to get there. So we've done some pilots, early stage pilots, using AI in traffic signals, because traffic signals traditionally, we're just looking at the flow of cars and vehicles on the road. But actually, cities are more interested now in how do we manage our cycling networks, people walking, our bus networks, kind of sustainable transport. So actually moving to a system where we can look at all the different modes that are going through a junction, and then making different decisions based on who we want to give priority to at potentially a different time of day. So during rush hour, we might give I don't know, cars might have priority, and then outside of that we might want to give priority to cyclists or pedestrians, or as we move into the center of the city, we might want to at rush hour give pedestrians and cyclists more priority. Then there are systems emerging that can kind of help and support us with that use AI, and I think that's that's potentially really interesting. Planning infrastructure, building digital twins.
Yeah.
There's some really exciting kind of work in that space as well. So yeah, I'm really positive about how AI, I think, will improve cities, how it will help us with kind of city building, but you know, at the same time, I also listen to podcasts where the creators of AI tell us that we're all doomed. We're all going to die.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the weird thing, right? Is I think what they see is the unfiltered, uncontrolled version. And I think, I think the public versions that we see have so many guardrails on them now that you you're not actually seeing what potentially can happen in the background. And I think that's what scares them, is because they get that unfiltered view of how the AI actually behaves, which is probably exactly, the worst of science fiction, that science fiction writers have been writing about since the, what, 1930s, 1940s. Is everybody understood that there's, sort of great potential for this to go horribly wrong. And I mean, even we've now seen that for example, um, the AI now recognizes when it's being tested, so it knows to give the correct answers to pass the test. Do you know what I mean? So it's like it's aware enough to know that it's like, oh, okay, they're asking me these questions to see if I give the right answer, so I'll give the right answer. Like, which is, and this all goes back again to everything I've been saying, which is it behaves exactly like a human. That's exactly what a human would do. If a human thought, oh, I'm being psychologically tested to see if I'm crazy or not, I'm going to give the answer that's going to make me seem not crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? And it lies, and humans lie, and it makes up stuff because humans make up stuff. And
But
hallucinations or creativity. In a human, you would call that being creative. I have some mates who are absolutely, completely bonkers, and they come out with the most nutty stuff all the time, and it's amazing. and, and you just go, oh, that's them. But when it's in an AI, everybody goes, oh my God, it's like hallucinating and making up stuff. I'm like, yeah, like you don't have a friend that does that?
but I think people think, computers shouldn't do that, because basically they don't have a personality. It's about logic. And so I think people are really struggling with that
Mm,
concept that an AI you know generates nonsense, and or can, I don't know, interact and kind of talk with you like that. It's
yeah,
just, yeah.
but but this is what I mean, right? Like they said, oh, it's got to pass the Turing test, and it passed the Turing test like years and years and years ago, and then they went, oh, um, that's not a good enough test. Let's do another kind of test, and then they did that, and it passed that, and then they're like, oh, yeah, okay, maybe that test isn't. It's like, how many tests does it have to pass before you kind of start going, it knows what it's doing?
Yeah.
And we've had versions where they've tried to delete it, and it goes off and creates a copy of itself behind the scenes on another server on the internet somewhere else to preserve itself. So now it's actually showing, signs of self-preservation, in a sort of unprompted way. And we've got other companies that are saying they literally they can't release it to the public because it's too dangerous, because they don't know what it's going to do. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we have created it, and I suspect that behind the scenes, again, the people who are building these tools are probably looking at it and going, holy shit, this is like actually a thing. And it
Yeah.
it
Uh, uh,
behaves on its own, and it has its own self-interest, and they're desperately just trying to control it. But I reckon it won't be too many years before one like totally breaks free and then just starts doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
I mean, well, what I find difficult is that there are people building AIs that are saying, you know, it's become almost sentient. This is dangerous, and
Mm.
then just continue building it as
Yeah.
if, like, I can't help it. I've just got to continue doing it, even though
Yeah.
this could destroy the world.
Yeah.
I just, I find that difficult. I
It's because
have to
they're paying
say.
them, millions of dollars a year to do it, and they're just kind of like, yeah. But but this is something that goes back to Silicon Valley, and in a previous life when I first moved to the UK, I was installing software all around the world, and I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. And the thing is that a lot of those, a lot of the tech bros, we'll call them, um, a lot of the tech bros actually believe that what they're doing is a positive, and
Yeah,
they genuinely don't understand the concept that all of this could go horribly wrong. They have this unwavering belief that humans are good and that we'll just work it out and everything will be fine in the end and we're just going to build it and we'll see what happens but we'll sort it out. And they, in almost this naive kind of way that they don't understand how the world works, and then somebody comes out and does something really evil with it, and then they genuinely can't understand that somebody would do that with the tool, or that the tool would do that. And I don't know how someone operates in that world, but I genuinely believe a lot of them feel that way, and they really don't actually see that, you know, there's potentially so much bad in it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there is a big conversation around sovereign technology and how do we move away from big Silicon Valley companies, and it's really difficult.
Mm.
Um, you know, in the UK, we're seeing like Palantir, obviously, doing work in the NHS, and you just have to look at what the CEO of Palantir put out a couple of weeks ago to realise that, you know, maybe you know, our aims and objectives to the NHS don't really align with the company's ethos.
Yeah, but then, yeah, it's a tough one. And again, having sort of, you know, been on the inside of the data companies and stuff, then at some point you're like, we would really like to use someone else, but there isn't another platform that actually does what their platform does.
Yeah,
And, you know, then you, as the NHS or as any government body, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because you've got stuff that you want to do and they're the only ones that can do it. And
yeah, I know it's really
yeah,
difficult, and you know we are reliant on Microsoft. You know,
yeah,
we all councils
yeah,
use Microsoft.
yeah.
You know, the I think the default is to then use Copilot, to use Azure and Fabric, you know, for your data platforms, and
Mm,
just because it's easy, because it easily integrates with everything else that you do, and
yeah.
but you know, I think we need to sometimes resist that temptation. I mean, we certainly have. We, you know, we use a specialist transport data platform because actually they really understand transport data. They know what we're trying to do. Um, Really experienced in a way that, you know, the kind of big companies like Microsoft aren't,
Mm,
and a lot more agile actually, and a lot more able to respond to kind of hyper local concerns.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, I know. It's, you know, I'm glad that you're still doing these AI podcasts. You know, I think when you started them, it was, you know, it was because you were having lots of kind of interesting conversations with people about AI, and I think we just need to keep talking about it because it's changing and evolving so quickly that we need to understand what's happening, and you know what the impacts are on both our personal and kind of work lives. And so yeah, yeah, it's whenever I've kind of listened to the conversations you have, it always helps me kind of, you know, think about my own kind of context, and you know how we can either harness or, you know, not AI for our own benefit. You know, I think the really important thing is though we just keep thinking about public good, and you know what's good for us as a
Yeah,
as a
thank you, Dan.
community.
And I was quite in the beginning. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to be the canary in the coal mine, you know, and you remember, you know, I had a couple of ladies that worked in the office that I was in that had lost all their business within a couple of months of ChatGPT coming out, and you know, I thought it was going to be absolutely devastating for creatives in particular, and and it is having a massive impact, that's for sure, but it's not, you know, it hasn't panned out quite as bad as we thought it would. in some areas. And I think I'm much more positive about it now. And I like talking, I am going to go back and talk to several people, but I'm going to talk to new people as well. So I'm not just going to go back and rehash with everybody I've talked to before, but I'm really trying to now, I want to focus on what people are doing and how they're using it in a good way. So you talking about, like the council using it for data and all that sort of stuff to kind of show people that yes, there are scary sides of it, right? And there are sides that, you have to be really careful about. And we don't want kids just going in and using it to do their homework and all that because of all the bad, there's issues with that, sure. But there are also very valid, very good reasons where it is saving money, bringing efficiency, and it is ultimately going to make, I think, things better for everybody. So I'm trying to be a little bit more
Sure.
positive
And
at
saving
this point.
lives as well. When you look at the applications in the NHS for things like imaging and
Yeah.
diagnostics, I mean, it's just I truly think that will have a revolutionary effect on healthcare in the future.
Yeah. And you know the story. It's doing the scans and particularly around radiology, AI is extremely good. It's better than humans now and more accurate than humans at doing that analysis. And so they use it. I think the US has 700 different companies that are approved to do scan analysis and stuff from radiology. And originally, everybody thought, well, this is going to wipe out radiologists, right? Like, it's just going to take over the whole thing. And actually, it's exactly the opposite because now, because it's cheap and fast and accurate, every doctor is sending people for a scan, and there aren't enough radiologists to manage the scanning process. So it's actually, I think they said something like it's going to double or triple the number of radiologists
Wow.
needed. And so they're desperate for people to go into radiology because you still have to manage the people, you still have to get them in, you have to do the scans, you have to,
Yeah.
all of those human parts are now even more important because the technology is faster and better so everyone can get a scan. And so again, going back to the tech bros, this is grudgingly, this is one of those instances where they go, well, we'll see what the positives are down the line, but all these new jobs will come up, and it's like it's not a new job, but I see what they mean, right? So it
Yeah.
was an unintended sort of consequence that now radiology is more popular than ever, and the scans are better, and they're doing more of them, and they're helping more people. So it's kind of a win-win-win. So I think that's where I'm kind of sitting right now is I want to pick up on the positives, the good uses of it. Where is it being used effectively, and how is that helping everybody?
Yeah, I think that's really important to give a balanced view so that people aren't just reading about the kind of negative things.
Yeah,
So
because
yeah,
I mean
keep
that's fun to
keep
talk
pushing.
about, but
Yeah, of course.
that's why I have a whole podcast about people who've had terrible things happen to them. But again, it's the positive thing that happens afterwards. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That is the better part of it. So
You,
awesome.
you, I think we've seen it before with lots of technologies where people have talked about it being kind of revolutionary. Actually, it's kind of a slow evolution, and things just get better. So we'll see where we get to. I mean, we might not be here this time next year because we've been wiped out by
Exactly.
our AI overlords, and I am completely wrong. But
Or Russia.
yes, yeah, we're Russia.
Or the Iranians. Like, who knows?
Yeah,
Like, exactly, this whole conversation may be moot in a year because we may all just be bombed. But who knows?
and on
We
that
won't talk
note,
about any of that.
yeah,
That's dangerous territory for everyone. We'll do that over beers.
yeah,
All right, Dan. Thanks
excellent.
very much. I'm conscious. I know you've got a hard stop in about 5 minutes anyway, so it's about time to wind up. But yeah, again, thanks very much for coming back on and having a chat. It's always a pleasure.
No, great to speak to you, and thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And I will book in some time to come see you guys in Cambridge just for a social, I think, and we can
Brilliant.
go sit
Always
by the
welcome.
river and drink some beers.
Excellent.
Brilliant.
It's great.
All right.
Thanks
Thanks,
very
Dan.
much. Cheers.